All right, we're in John chapter 9, and it's a long story. We can't read all the verses surrounding it. Rebecca did a great job in reading the first 15 verses of one story that is 41 verses. Now, I'm going to supplement her 15 with 6 more. Is that okay? So let's listen to these. Oh, maybe 7. Okay, 7 more. Here they are. Listen to this. This is the end of the story of this. So sandwiched in between, you're going to have to kind of read on your own, but I want you to hear this. Jesus had heard that they had thrown him out. This is the man that was born blind and could now see. And when they found him, they said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Who is he, sir?" the man asked. "Tell me so that I may believe in him." And Jesus said, "You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." Then the man said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshiped him. And Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and that those who see will become blind." And some of the Pharisees who were with him heard him say this and asked, "What? Are we blind too?" And Jesus said, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains." Heard a story about a doctor, a chemist, and an engineer that had all 3 offended the king. And so they were sentenced to die on the same day. And the day of the execution arrived, and the doctor was sent and led up to the guillotine. And as he strapped the doctor to the guillotine, the executioner said to him, "Head up or head down?" And the doctor said, "Head up." And he said, "Blindfold or no blindfold?" And he said, "No blindfold." And so the executioner raised the axe, and it went zing, and it down came the blade within about 1 inch of the doctor's neck. Well, the law stated that if an executioner didn't succeed the first time, the prisoner had to be released. And so the doctor was set free. Well, then the chemist was led up to the guillotine, and he was asked the same question, head up or head down, by the executioner, and he said, "Head up." "Blindfold or no blindfold?" "No blindfold." So the executioner raised the axe, and zing, it came down within about 1 inch of the man's neck. Stopped there, and so the chemist was set free. Finally, the engineer was led up to the guillotine, and he was asked, "Head up or head down?" And he said, "Oh, head up." He said, "Blindfold or no blindfold?" "No blindfold." So the executioner, he raised the axe, but before he could cut the rope, the engineer said, Wait, I see the problem." I could tell that story having engineering training and knowing that we're problem solvers. Sometimes it is better not to see. And we go through life as if we're blindfold, with head down. We have our heads in the sand, and it just feels better, doesn't it? To not know. But I would suggest, according to this story in John chapter 9, and particularly biblically, it is always better to see than to be blind. And in our story today, as Jesus heals this man born blind, we want to find an application for our own walk, learning how to see. And you know what? You could study this particular text for, I would say 6 weeks and not find something, and we could mine it, because what we're going to see is that there's a whole lot of different characters in the story that are trying to learn how to see. But we're going to look at one particular aspect of that today. And really the question is this: are we willing, that is in our heart of hearts, to take off the blindfolds? In other words, I'm asking you to do an honest inventory of your own heart and your own life. And that's hard. To take off the blindfolds and see ourselves as we really are, and to see God as He really is. Why would we want anything else? Why would we desire anything else but to see ourselves as we honestly are and to see Him as He really is? And yet I want to suggest that most of us walk through life sheltering ourselves even from ourselves, and sheltering ourselves from who God really is. And so in this story, let's just do this for just 1 minute. Go ahead and close your eyes. Imagine for a minute that you're blind. Imagine for just a second what do you feel in your blindness? What would you miss? What is it that you would want? What would be the yearning of your heart? Light, sight, clarity, insight. Okay, open your eyes because some of you are falling asleep on me. In this text in chapter 9 and verse 2, his disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" And Jesus answers, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life." And the disciples asked this question out of ignorance. They assumed, and they were ignorantly, that the man's blindness was related to something the man did or something the man's parents did. And that was actually standard rabbinical understanding and teaching. And Jesus brings an insight right here, frankly, that has shaped the Western civilization for the last 10,000 years as he breaks this connection between sin or blindness and the sin of the parents or the sin of the person. A magnificent insight on Jesus' part. But the disciples are stuck in their ignorance here. And what is interesting about this, by the very way that they ask the question, they are not really open to a new answer, if you read it carefully, because they're assuming that it must be related to the parents or it must be something the man did. They could not see beyond that. And so their assumption was wrong, therefore their outcome was wrong. If you start with the wrong premise, you're going to end up in the wrong place. How revolutionary was Jesus' insight here. And I believe still today, ignorance is a problem for us. And how could that be in the day of the internet, where we can Google anything, and Wikipedia's got a pretty good answer? I mean, 99% of the time, it's got a pretty good answer. And yet we sometimes are still trapped in our ignorance, and maybe that's because we don't really want to know, or maybe that's because it's something that's beyond pure knowledge. It's not just about knowledge. It's our concern or our issue is more complex than just the facts. And so there has to be an opening of our mind to take time to learn truth. And I don't know how to say this in a strong enough way in this day and age that this is true for this church. And I would guess for most Christian churches in America, that our faith is about that deep. We've really even stopped asking questions about the depth of our understanding about who we are and who Christ is and what are the big truths of Scripture. And if that's the case, our ignorance, it begins to run over us, particularly as we look into the next generation. But what I see in these disciples is they turned everything into this sort of theological curiosity. without really wanting to know even the man. So I want to invite you, at least it's one of my life obsessions. It's probably one of my life obsessions to keep growing deeper for this reason. I became a Christian as an adult. Okay? And so I chose my faith. And I want that choice to count. And in making that choice, I left other background where it made an impact on my family and my family relationships for all my adult life. So I don't want a thin veneer. I want to know that I am right. I want to be on a pursuit for truth. I want to claim the faith, and I'm going to take it seriously. I want to invite you to do that as well. A passion for truth and for beauty and for goodness. So the disciples are there in their blindness, and they treat it as a theological debate. And so then the man goes home, and he goes home, and it's interesting because here the neighbors, they turn this whole thing into sort of a conversation. I would say, in fact, if the first issue for the disciples, they were blinded by their ignorance, we could say the neighbors are blinded by gossip. They talk about the man, they don't talk to the man. Isn't that interesting? In fact, they call him the man. It's like, how could the neighbor not have a name? But they don't know his name. Because they didn't see him as a person. They saw him as a point of conversation. And I think about the temptations there in terms of our own relationships and being blinded, even in our own gossip. Let's move on. He goes to the parents. We see that the parents, the Pharisees come to the parents, and I want to read 2 verses in 8 and 9 again. Actually, 22 and 23. We know he is our son, the parents answered, and we know he was born blind. But how he can see now, or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself. It's really interesting that what I see, 3 phrases that are key in here. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself. That is, don't involve me, the parents were saying, in the fact that he can now see. He is of age. You come of age in a Jewish culture, maybe 12 years old. I don't know if he was a teenager, if he was older than that. We don't really know from the text. Just the point is, the parents were saying, leave me out of it. And here's why. They feared the Pharisees. So they feared their faith. They were giving way to fear to the point where if the Pharisees wanted to make an issue about this guy, they wanted them to go after the guy or after Jesus, not after them. For them not to excommunicate, and that's our exact word that we have in our Greek text, excommunicate him from the temple. Not him, but them, the family. To throw them out, for them to no longer be a part of their Jewish group that they were with. And so that was what they were fearing, that they would sort of lose their religious background, their identity, by standing up for their own son. And so they give way to fear. Ask him. He is of age. Think about that story, and yet in the midst of that, the man, and if you'll track this through the story, and you're going to have to read this on your own, every one of these events helps reinforce the man's faith in what actually happened. In his faith continues to evolve. So at first, he doesn't really know what happens himself, other than, I was blind, but now I can see. But as this encounter with the neighbors, as this encounter with the parents, as he now will encounter the Pharisees, he keeps going deeper and deeper in terms of his own insight into what happened to him and into who Jesus is. And so the one from Luke chapter 4, the one that we say, give sight to the blind? Right embedded in the vision, our understanding of who Jesus is, happens right here in John's gospel. And this light and this life and this sight is happening to this man. But there's one other group I want us to see in here. Who am I missing so far? We've got the Pharisees. And they're blinded. In fact, they're the most blind of all. And we can't read the story without thinking about them. They were big on traditions, first of all. And so in verse 14 really set them off when the text says, now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. And I'm thinking, how many times could we have read that in John's gospel already? We're seeing that over and over, and it almost cannot seem to make an impression on us like it did on them. But the Sabbath was held so sacred and so holy to them, for Jesus to do this on the Sabbath was to make him a sinner. That's the word they use about this Pharisee, about this teacher, the Pharisees did about Jesus. He's a sinner. And so the reader has to come to grips with what's going on in this story. And again, here are these Pharisees, and I want to suggest that they're blinded by tradition. Here's how their logic worked. Sinners do not keep the Sabbath. Jesus made mud on the Sabbath. Therefore, Jesus is a sinner. Therefore, he cannot be who he said he is. Therefore, he is trouble. And all through this text, we have got to decide, are we going to be on the side of Jesus? Are we going to take his message seriously? Or will we be like the Pharisees, blinded by tradition? It's all over the Bible where we see that God blinds the minds of unbelievers, where we see passages like you will be ever seeing but never perceiving. And so I have to ask myself, and I've asked it many, many times this week, that happened to the Pharisees. Can that happen to me? Can that happen to me? Can I be blinded and think I see, but actually I've got it all wrong? I'm the one that's blind. Can I be blinded by my tradition? Can we in this church be blinded by our traditions and get things out of priority? Can we lose the focus on the important things and get preoccupied with things that really don't matter so much? Can we be rule keepers over Jesus lovers? Can we somehow hold up tradition as more important than doctrine? Can we somehow see our tradition and miss the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ? What keeps these religious men from seeing? And I would say that if we had to apply ourselves to anyone in this story, maybe we would say the disciples, maybe we would say the neighbors, maybe at times the parents, but certainly at other times the Pharisees as well. Our traditions get in the way. John Maxwell tells the story about 4 monkeys that were placed in a room with a tall pole at the center, and suspended from the top of was a bunch of bananas. And so one of the monkeys starts going up the pole to grab one of the bananas to eat, and just as he is about to grab one of the bananas, he's doused with this torrent of water. So he scampers down the pole, squealing all the way. And so then another monkey tries that, and he's drenched with cold water. And after making several attempts, they finally give up. The monkeys will say, okay, the bananas are staying. We're not going to mess with these bananas anymore. Then the researchers, and this was an actual experiment, removed one of the monkeys from the room and they replaced them with a new monkey. And the newcomer began to climb up the pole, of course, because he saw the bananas, and the other 3 monkeys grabbed him and pulled him down. And after trying to climb up the pole several times and being dragged down by the others, he finally gave up, and no one attempted to climb the pole again. So then the researchers replaced all the original monkeys one by one, and all the monkeys would drag down the other monkeys until none of the original monkeys were in the room, and yet none of them would go after the banana. They stopped one another from climbing, and none of them knew why. I think traditions can be like that. It certainly seems to be what happened to the Pharisees, where their own style of doing things began to be preemptive over what was most important. But I think even deeper than the tradition, and this will be my last point this morning, is that they were blinded by their own pride. And if there is a ouch in this text for me this week, it's been examining and thinking about my life in terms of my own pride. How much of my blindness is because I think I know? Because I think that my sight is better, is superior, is a little more insightful than the other. And so this phrase, for judgment, I have come into this world so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind. Wait a minute. Do I see myself as one who is blind? Who needs the sight of heaven? Or do I see myself as one who can already see? I already know the truth. I don't need what God is bringing from heaven. I wouldn't say it so blatantly, but it begins to work in my heart. And I believe this is what pride looks like when it is hard for us to believe. Paul described it as looking through a glass darkly or dimly. And occasionally we have these moments of sight and where we experience God, but it seems to me that day by day, almost all of our experiences and our encounters in the world are whether it is getting ahead or making more money or looking attractive or fearing death, all of these things are reinforcing our self-sight rather than God insight. So what characterizes those who see? And I want you to hear this and then we'll finish up. What characterizes those who are blind then see is they recognize that goodness comes only from God. That sight comes from God, that it is 100% God, that it is pure 100% grace. It's not part my grace and part God's grace. It is God's grace. It is all of God's grace all of the time. And the man could see it, but the Pharisees could not. And so it is saying, I can do nothing about my blindness. The man is helpless. And it is saying, my life is unmanageable. I need you, Lord. It is being completely dependent. All light comes from God. And the result of that is embedded right in our text in verses 36 through 38. Let's read it again. Who is he, sir? The man asked. Tell me so that I may believe in him. And Jesus said, you have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking to you. Then the man said, Lord, I believe. And look at what our text says. And he worshiped him. And I would say the premier indicator of whether you're relying on your own sight or you're finding sight from heaven is indicated by your worship. I don't simply mean in this assembly, though it includes that. But it is a heart that is bowed, that is broken, that is contrite, that is submitted, that is humbled, recognizing who is truly the light. It couldn't have come home more clearly to me yesterday than through in the memorial we did. And I should say, Jeremy did a wonderful, wonderful job, and I was very proud of him in a very difficult memorial service for a 26-year-old young man. Very proud of this church in the way that we served, 150, 200 people that stayed for lunch here yesterday. And being able to open this building and be able to be ministers of love and reconciliation. But I couldn't help in the middle of that memorial to ask myself some questions that I want you to ask yourself today, in order that you don't leave blind. Who am I? In the midst of a 26-year-old death, you ask that question. What is my life about? Am I focused on the right things today? What really matters? What really matters today? And there's some things that just don't matter that I need to let go. Where's my hope going to come from? Is it going to come from my own generated abilities, or is it hope from heaven? So I ask you to consider again the light that Jesus brings into a dark world and the way that he can open the eyes of the blind, even us today.